slash Sony universe, whatever you want to call it.
So for those who wanted Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man to return, or simply there to be a Spider-Man in the Venom Spider-Man universe that Sony is now building right now, looks like we are getting our wish. According to recent reports, Sony has plans for Andrew Garfield. In fact, they had some pretty big plans for Andrew Garfield lined up for the Madam Web movie. However, also according to other reports, he's not just going to be limited to Sony, to the Sony Spider-Man universe side of things, and that he could actually be appearing in the MCU. In fact, one report suggests that he is going to be around even after Avengers Secret Wars in the MCU, which a lot of people would just really freak out about. Now, we know that Tom Holland's Spider-Man is going to remain in the MCU after Avengers Secret Wars, along with some other main MCU characters as well. So it makes total sense. Plus, not to mention, we have heard that not only is Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man going to be returning for Avengers Secret Wars, but he is actually going to be one of the main characters of the story of Avengers Secret Wars. But it does seem like Sony and Marvel are indeed going to eventually cross over, most likely in Avengers Secret Wars. And the good news is it does seem like they do at least have a outline of a plan on Sony's side. And it really does seem like they are building up to something pretty big, including a big crossover with the MCU. So a lot of great news to go over today for Spider-Man fans. Now, before we dive into the good news, I unfortunately have to start this video off with some bad news. But the bad news is kind of good at the same time, in my opinion. The bad news is we could have had Andrew Garfield appear in a movie this year in 2024. So we're going to miss out on that. However, the good news that comes with this is the movie was Madam Web, a movie that many people believe is not going to be very good. So rather than having Andrew Garfield appear in a movie that is probably going to be a lot like the other Sony Spider-Verse movies that we've seen, they're saving him for hopefully something better. So like I said, bad and good, give and take, win and lose. I'd rather see him appear in a really epic way like in Venom 3 than to see him play kind of a small part in another movie that might not be so good. This news is coming from the insider Jeff Snyder on the Hot Mic podcast, where he stated Sony wanted Andrew Garfield to be the Spider-Man of Madam Web, then changed plans to Tom Holland, then realized they did the timeline wrong, so they reshot and removed everything referencing Spider-Man and a particular year, which is really, really interesting on a few different levels. One, and not to talk too badly about Sony, but they wanted to do this, but then realized that they got it wrong. I'm sorry, it seems like a very Sony Spider-Man thing to do at this point. With all of the films that we've had so far, it just seems like they kind of don't really have, or at least before, didn't really have a well fleshed out plan. Something else that is pretty interesting is that they wanted Tom Holland. The reason that's kind of interesting and a little bit confusing is because Marvel Studios for the first Venom film did not want Tom Holland to appear in that film. Sony did. In that disagreement, Marvel Studios won since Tom Holland was the Spider-Man of the MCU. Marvel said they didn't want him to appear in Venom because they didn't want the audience to confuse the universes. They didn't want people to think that Tom Holland's Spider-Man was in the Venom universe. Now, since then, we know that a lot has happened with Marvel Studios and Sony, and it does seem like they are playing really nicely with each other right now. And we know that contracts can be renewed, and we know that, in fact, they have reached a new contract. In fact, we know that Tom Holland himself has recently signed a new contract as well. So it's definitely possible, but I still find it interesting that Sony would want Tom Holland and not Andrew Garfield when it seems like the plan is to have Andrew Garfield appear in the Sony Spider-Man universe more often than Tom Holland. However, moving forward, we do know that Sony and Marvel Studios have plans to cross over. In fact, this has basically already happened in the post-credit scene of Venom Let There Be Carnage and the post-credit scene of Spider-Man No Way Home. A lot of people, including myself, at first just thought that, well, both of these
Meanwhile, on Paramount Mountain.
Hey, Peppa, go on.
Wow, Josh Allen, what a quarterback.
credit scenes were made specifically to get a symbiote in the MCU. But as time went on, we realized, and insiders have reported, that there's more to this than meets the eye. Yes, it did put the Venom symbiote in the MCU, but Marvel Studios could have done that on their own without having the universes cross over. Because now the origin for Venom in the MCU is that he came from a different universe, but that conveniently fits into the story that the MCU is going through right now, the multiverse saga. But also, here's the thing, not only does Sony own the rights to Spider-Man, but also Venom. So Sony wants and will will legally get a piece of the action, which is really why they teamed up with the MCU in the first place. Kevin Feige basically went to Amy Pascal and said, yeah, we're going to do it better. Let us do it. And that is indeed what happened. The same thing is basically going to happen with Venom, and this has already been confirmed with these post-credit scenes. But let's not forget about the Morbius post-credit scene and the reference to Spider-Man. Clearly, Sony has their own plan of bringing their own Spider-Man to their Spider-Man universe, which is now believed to be Andrew Garfield. Madam Web is supposed to be a multiverse movie, at least the start of the multiverse in the Sony Spider-Man universe. In the comics, Madam Web has the ability to travel throughout the multiverse, so it's widely believe that they are setting that up with Madam Web. So them wanting Tom Holland in the movie doesn't mean that they don't want Andrew Garfield to appear in other movies. Tom Holland could simply be the Peter Parker Spider-Man that we know from the MCU. So this would have been really kind of the second or third step in the universes crossing over. And there have been really, at this point, many steps to make that happen. Spider-Man No Way Home showed us, all of the villains from the other Spider-Man universes owned by Sony, plus the other Spider-Man were there as well. Then the post-credits for Morbius, Venom 2, and Spider-Man No Way Home. Clearly, there's a plan here. And like I mentioned in the beginning, the plan goes beyond the multiverse saga, which is incredibly interesting, and we'll talk about that in just a bit. But first, big thank you to Avatar Braving the Elements for sponsoring this video. I know many of you love the breakdowns that we do, Easter egg videos, reactions, and reviews on this channel, which is why I think you will love Avatar Braving the Elements, the official companion podcast for Avatar: The Last Airbender. Now, I personally love companion podcasts. Rewatch every episode of The Last Airbender. They're joined by special guests like the cast, super fans, and even the you get your podcasts. Insider My Time to Shine Hello didn't ask me anything on Twitter back in October of 2023, so a few months ago, and he was asked any plans for Garfield Spidey post reboot, in which she replied, yes. Then was asked a follow-up to the Garfield question, is Andrew himself on board, or is it still a work in progress sort of deal, in which she replied with, he is on board. So Andrew Garfield Spider-Man seems to be here for the long term. But some people have asked, well, how exactly is this going to work? Well, with the reboot, remember it's a soft reboot, I believe everyone is going to be very well aware of the multiverse. And I think multiverse travel might even be pretty possible and maybe even common post reboot, which would make for quite an interesting Marvel Cinematic Universe. But more importantly for Sony, that opens up a lot for them, like for Spider-Man, the one being used in the MCU, Tom Holland's, being able to go into their universe without it really being that big of a deal. And remember, they set this up with the post-credit for Venom, Let There Be Carnage. We can't assume that the events of Spider-Man No Way Home are what brought Venom to the MCU and then pushed him back to his universe, but whatever the events may be, even if those aren't what actually made it happen, it's very clear that that event that brought Venom to the MCU and then back happened in both the Sony Spider-Verse and the MCU. This is what is setting up the big crossover. Plus, not to mention, it is widely believed that Sony is planning for some type of Spider-Geddon storyline where a bunch of different Spider-Man variants come together in a live action movie. And again, if you look back based on everything we've talked about today, we can see how they are indeed setting something like that up. Now, as far as why they didn't use Tom Holland because the story year was off, well, it's pretty much been proven at this point that Madam Web is going to take place in the year 2003, based off of what we have seen from the trailer. In the trailer, we can see a billboard that is a Calvin Klein display that was shown in real life in New York City in 2003. We also see a man reading a newspaper that's an article about the legend Gary Carter being inducted into the Hall of Fame. This happened in real life in 2003. And one of the biggest ones is that a set photo from Madam Web shows a banner for Beyonce's 2003 debut album, Dangerously in Love. So Andrew Garfield Spider-Man or Tom Holland Spider-Man would not be Spider-Man here. The Amazing Spider-Man came out in 2012. Then Tom Holland Spider-Man was way after with Civil War in 2016. So if any Spider-Man were to show up, it would definitely be Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, since the timeline would line up then. Tobey Maguire's first Spider-Man film released in 2002. And it does seem like with Ezekiel Sims and Madam Web, they are indeed going to tie in a bunch of different timelines and a bunch of different Spider-Man. So I would not be surprised if Tobey Maguire Spider-Man has a cameo in this movie, especially since we learned that they wanted Andrew Garfield and then they wanted Tom Holland. Now, I know they wanted Tom Holland just so they could get him in the film advertise it and get people to go watch the movie based off of Tom Holland being in the film. Which honestly, yeah, it would have worked. People who weren't interested in Madam Web would probably go watch it just to watch Tom Holland's Spider-Man. But unfortunately, things didn't work out. So if they had to scrap Tom Holland's Spider-Man and Andrew Garfield's because the timeline didn't work out, then that means they might revert back to Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man because the timeline does match up. But overall, it looks like we are getting more of Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, and of course, Tom Holland's Spider-Man in both the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the Sony Spider-Verse. It looks like all three of these Spider-Man are going to be jumping back and forth, which is really, really exciting news, but let's just hope that they do it right. They do it in a really great way that really excites fans and does the characters justice. Fingers crossed on that one, but hey, let me know your thoughts about this in the comments down below. What do you think of this news? And if you have any theories, be sure to let us know. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to stay up to date on the MCU and Sony Spider-Verse. And if you subscribe and leave a comment, you're automatically entered in our giveaway for a chance to win a PS5.
Okay, that's what's up. Thank y'all for watching. We're gonna head into